The bullies mocked the quiet kid. They had no idea he was a champion fighter. Ethan Chen slouched his way through the crowded hallways of Westlake High, eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. At 15, he was neither particularly short nor tall, with a softness around his middle that made him an easy target. His oversized hoodie, a shield more than a fashion statement, hung from his frame as he navigated the throng of students rushing to their next classes. It was his third week at Westlake, and already he had mapped out the danger zones. The main hallway intersection near the trophy case was worst. The cafeteria came in second. The back gym entrance after sixth period rounded out the top three. Ethan had learned to time his movements, to become as close to invisible as possible, but today he'd gotten caught up finishing notes in chemistry and was running late. "Hey, look who it is, Chen Machine!" The voice carried over the hallway chatter, causing several heads to turn. Ethan flinched but kept walking. Just 10 more steps to Mr. Grayson's English class. 9, 8. A hand clapped down on his shoulder, spinning him around. "I'm talking to you, Tubby." Blake Thornton stood there, his 6-foot frame towering over Ethan. As captain of the wrestling team and son of the town's mayor, Blake carried himself with the entitlement of someone who had never faced consequences for his actions. Behind him stood his ever-present shadows, Dylan Reese, a lanky redhead with a perpetual sneer, and Tyler Walsh, broad-shouldered, and already sporting the beginnings of a beard despite being only 16. "Sorry," Ethan mumbled, eyes still downcast. "I'm late for class." "Sorry? That's it?" Blake leaned in closer. "You bumped into me yesterday and didn't even apologize properly." Ethan hadn't bumped into anyone. He was methodical about maintaining his personal bubble, but that hardly mattered to Blake, who was simply looking for an excuse. "I'm sorry about that," Ethan said softly, feeling his heart rate accelerate. Around them, a small crowd had begun to form. Nobody intervened. Mrs. Peterson, the history teacher, walked by, her eyes briefly meeting Ethan's before she hurried past. Clipboard clutched to her chest. Just like always, nobody wants to get involved. "I think you need to learn some manners," Blake said, shoving Ethan back against the lockers. The metal rattled against his spine. "New kids need to understand the hierarchy around here." Ethan felt his muscles tense reflexively, years of training signaling his body to move into a defensive stance. He forced himself to remain slack, to keep his hands open and non-threatening at his sides. "Not here, not now. Remember what Dad said." "Leave him alone, Blake," came a voice from the edge of the crowd. A girl with dark hair pulled into a messy bun stepped forward. Olivia Mendez, who sat next to Ethan in Spanish class and was the only person who'd voluntarily spoken to him since his arrival. Blake's attention shifted. "Got your girlfriend fighting. Your battles, Chen." "I'm not his girlfriend," Olivia said, rolling her eyes. "I'm just tired of watching you act like a caveman. It's boring." The bell rang, saving Ethan from whatever was coming next. Blake reluctantly stepped back. "This isn't over," he said, pointing a finger at Ethan's chest. "Not even close." Then he turned and swaggered away, Dylan and Tyler trailing behind him, each giving Ethan a threatening look as they passed. The crowd dispersed quickly as students rushed to their classes. Olivia gave Ethan a small smile. "You okay?" she asked. Ethan nodded, readjusting his backpack. "Thanks. Don't mention it," she replied. "But you might want to consider standing up for yourself sometime. Guys like Blake don't stop. So until someone makes them." Ethan forced a smile. "I'll keep that in mind." What Olivia didn't understand, what nobody at Westlake could possibly know, was that Ethan Chen was intimately familiar with standing up for himself. Back in San Francisco, before his family's abrupt move to this small Midwestern town, Ethan had been a rising star in competitive mixed martial arts. At 13, he'd won the junior state championship in his weight class. By 14, he'd placed second in nationals, earning him the nickname the Silent Storm for his quiet demeanor that belied explosive power in the ring. But that was before everything changed. Before his father, a former champion himself who had trained Ethan since he could walk, accepted a witness protection deal with the FBI. Before they'd left behind their names, their home, their entire lives to start over in this anonymous town, where no one could know their true identities or the dangerous people who might still be looking for them. Just keep a low profile, his father had instructed him sternly the night before his first day at Westlake. No fighting, no drawing, attention to yourself. No matter what happens, our safety depends on it, Ethan. So Ethan had nodded and promised. And each day since, as Blake and his friends found new ways to torment him, he'd repeated his father's words in his head like a mantra. No fighting, no drawing attention. Our safety depends on it. He slipped into English class just as Mr. Grayson was closing the door, apologizing quietly and sliding into his seat at the back. As Mr. Grayson began discussing Lord of the Flies, Ethan's mind wandered back to his old life, to the discipline of daily training, the rush of stepping into the ring, the feeling of total confidence in his own abilities. If they only knew, he thought, glancing across the room to where Blake sat, throwing paper airplanes when Mr. Grayson wasn't looking. If they only knew what I could do to them. But they couldn't know, and Ethan had to make sure it stayed that way. The cafeteria bustled with the typical lunch rush. As Ethan found an empty corner table, he unpacked his lunch, a simple sandwich his mother had prepared that morning, and pulled out his history textbook, hoping to get some studying done. The table's isolation was strategic. It offered a clear view of the entrance and was close to a side exit. Old habits from his father's security training died hard. He was halfway through his sandwich when a shadow fell across his textbook. "This seat taken?" Olivia asked, not waiting for an answer before sitting down opposite him. She set her lunch tray down with a clatter. No," Ethan replied, surprised. In the 3 weeks he'd been at Westlake, no one had voluntarily sat with him at lunch. "You always eat alone?" she asked, taking a bite of what the cafeteria was calling lasagna, but looked more like a red-tinted geological formation. Ethan shrugged. "I don't mind it." She studied him for a moment. "You're not what I expected." "What does that mean?" "New kids usually try harder to fit in. You're like, actively trying not to." Ethan closed his textbook, just focusing on school. "We move around a lot." This, at least, wasn't a lie. Since entering the witness protection program 8 months ago, they'd already relocated once when his father thought he'd spotted one of Viktor Sokolov's men at a gas station. The Russian mobster his father had testified against wasn't known for forgetting betrayals. "Military family," Olivia guessed. "Something like that," Ethan replied, relieved at the ready-made explanation. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the main entrance. Blake and his crew had arrived, making their presence known by loudly laughing and pushing past a freshman who dropped his tray. Ethan tensed, watching them scan the cafeteria. It didn't take long for Blake's eyes to lock onto his table. "Great," Ethan muttered. Olivia followed his gaze. "Ignore them, they're just... Well, look at this cozy scene," Blake announced, arriving at their table with Tyler and Dylan flanking him. "Chen's got himself a girlfriend after all." "Get lost, Blake," Olivia said, not bothering to look up from her food. Blake ignored her, focusing on Ethan. "I've been thinking about our chat earlier, Chen. I don't think you really learned your lesson." "I'm just trying to eat lunch," Ethan said quietly, feeling his pulse quicken. "Yeah? And I'm just trying to make sure the new kid understands how things work around here." Blake reached over and grabbed Ethan's sandwich. "This looks good. Mind if I try it?" Before Ethan could respond, Blake took a large bite, then made a face of exaggerated disgust. "Man, that's as pathetic as you are." He dropped the sandwich back onto Ethan's lunch bag, then knocked Ethan's water bottle over, spilling it across the table and onto Ethan's lap. Ethan jumped up as the cold water soaked through his jeans. Around them, several students had begun to watch, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable but doing nothing. "Count to 5. Stay calm. Remember what's at stake." Ethan took a deep breath, willing his heart rate to slow, forcing his hands to unclench. "What's wrong, Chen? Got nothing to say?" Blake taunted, stepping closer. "Maybe you should go cry to Mommy about your wet pants." The cafeteria had grown quieter now, more eyes turning toward their confrontation. In the corner of his vision, Ethan spotted a lunch monitor finally noticing the situation, but she was all the way across the room. "Just leave me alone," Ethan said, grabbing napkins to blot his soaked jeans. "Or what?" Blake pressed, giving Ethan's shoulder a hard shove. "What are you going to do about it, Tubby?" Ethan stumbled back slightly, and in that moment, every instinct from years of training screamed at him to counter. A simple foot sweep would put Blake on the ground in seconds. A well-placed strike to the solar plexus would leave him gasping for air. Ethan could visualize each move with perfect clarity, his muscle memory ready to execute what his mind had mastered through thousands of repetitions. But he didn't move. Instead, he picked up his backpack and what remained of his lunch. "That's what I thought." Blake sneered, high-fiving Tyler. "All talk, no action." "He's not even all talk," Dylan added with a laugh. "He's just pathetic." Olivia stood up, her face flushed with anger. "You guys are such losers. Does bullying make you feel better about the fact that nobody actually likes you?" Blake's smug expression faltered for a moment before hardening. "Watch yourself, Mendez. You don't want to make enemies of the wrong people." "Too late," she fired back. The lunch monitor finally arrived, her voice cutting through the tension. "What's going on here? Everyone back to your seats now." Blake immediately switched to a pleasant smile. "Just welcoming the new student, Ms. Garcia. School spirit and all that." Ms. Garcia looked skeptically between them. "Mr. Chen, are you all right?" Ethan nodded quickly, not meeting her eyes. "I just spilled some water, my fault." "Well, get that cleaned up," she said, then turned to Blake. "Back to your table, Mr. Thornton." Blake gave Ethan one last threatening look before walking away with his friends, their laughter echoing across the cafeteria. "You shouldn't have lied," Olivia said once Ms. Garcia was out of earshot. "They're never going to stop if you keep covering for them." "Getting them in trouble would only make it worse," Ethan replied, though he knew the real reason was different. Any disciplinary incident would bring attention from school administrators, possibly calls home. His parents were already on edge, watching constantly for signs that their cover had been blown. The last thing Ethan needed was to give them another reason to pack up and move again. "So you're just going to let them walk all over you?" Olivia asked, incredulous. Ethan slung his backpack over his shoulder. "Sometimes walking away is the smarter choice." As he headed toward the bathroom to try to dry his jeans, Ethan couldn't help but think of his former teammates back in San Francisco, how they would react if they could see him now. The silent storm, reduced to taking abuse from amateurs who wouldn't last 10 seconds in a real fight. But as his father always taught him, discipline wasn't just about knowing when to strike, it was knowing when to hold back. And right now, holding back was the most difficult fight of all. For the next 2 weeks, the bullying intensified. Blake seemed to take Ethan's restraint as a personal challenge, each day finding new ways to humiliate him. They knocked books from his hands between classes, left threatening notes in his locker, and once tripped him in the hallway, sending him sprawling in front of dozens of laughing students. Through it all, Ethan maintained his composure, even as it became increasingly difficult. Each night after finishing homework, he would lock his bedroom door and silently work through his training routines, shadowboxing, core strengthening exercises, meditation techniques his father had taught him to maintain focus under pressure. It was the only thing keeping him sane. At school, Olivia had become his only ally, though her frustration with his passivity was evident. "I don't get you," she told him after Blake had accidentally spilled chocolate milk down the back of Ethan's shirt in the lunch line. "You act like none of this bothers you, but I know it must." Ethan, changing into his gym shirt in the bathroom while Olivia waited outside, called through the door. "Getting angry doesn't help anything. Neither does being a punching bag," she countered when he emerged. They walked to their shared history class together, Olivia filling the silence with chatter about an upcoming school dance that Ethan had no intention of attending. As they rounded the corner to Mr. Peterson's classroom, Ethan froze. Blake, Tyler, and Dylan were waiting by the door. Blake held something in his hand that made Ethan's blood run cold. A phone, screen illuminated, displaying a photo. "Chen!" "Perfect timing," Blake called out, his voice laced with malicious glee. "We were just doing some research on new students. Fascinating stuff." Ethan approached slowly, his stomach knotting. On the screen was a news article from 14 months. "Farewells to rising MMA star Ethan Chen takes junior national title." The photo showed Ethan, leaner and more visibly muscular, his arm raised in victory after the championship bout. "Imagine our surprise," Dylan said, "when Tyler's cousin from California recognized you, said you were some kind of fighting prodigy back in San Francisco." Ethan's mind raced. This was exactly what his father had feared. "That's not me," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Just someone with the same name." "Really?" Blake scrolled to another photo, this one a close-up of Ethan's face after a particularly brutal semi-final match. There was no mistaking the resemblance. "Seems like a pretty crazy coincidence." Olivia looked between the phone and Ethan, confusion evident on her face. "Is that really you?" Before Ethan could respond, Blake continued. "So here's what I'm thinking. Either you've been lying to everyone, pretending to be some helpless wimp when you're actually some kind of fighter." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Or you're just a coward who's too scared to stand up for himself, even with all that training." Tyler snickered. "I'm betting on coward." The bell rang, saving Ethan from having to respond as students began filing into the classroom. Blake held onto his arm as others passed. "The question is, why would someone who could defend himself choose not to?" he mused, studying Ethan's face. "Unless there's something else going on, something you're hiding." The implication sent a chill through Ethan. If Blake kept digging, he might discover the truth about why the Chen family had suddenly disappeared from San Francisco, about the federal case against Viktor Sokolov, about Ethan's father's testimony, about their new identities. "Just leave it alone," Ethan said, pulling his arm free. "It's not what you think." Blake's eyes narrowed. "Oh, we're just getting started, Chen Machine. Or should I call you the Silent Storm?" He laughed. "Not so silent when I'm done with you." As they took their seats in history class, Ethan could feel Olivia's questioning stare, but he avoided her eyes. His mind was already working through what would happen next, telling his parents tonight, the panicked phone call to their U.S. Marshal contact, the possibility of packing up and disappearing again. All because I couldn't keep a low enough profile. All because I couldn't just be nobody for a little while longer. Throughout the class, Ethan barely heard Mr. Peterson's lecture on the Civil War. Instead, his thoughts kept returning to one terrible truth. Blake had discovered part of his secret. How long before he uncovered the rest? Ethan didn't tell his parents that night or the next. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment, that there was no need to panic them unnecessarily, but deep down, he knew the truth. He was tired of running, tired of pretending to be someone he wasn't, tired of letting people like Blake dictate the terms of his existence. For 3 days, he managed to avoid Blake and his friends, taking alternate routes between classes and eating lunch in the library. But on Thursday afternoon, his luck ran out. Gym class had ended late, and Ethan found himself alone in the locker room, rushing to change before his next class. He had just pulled his shirt over his head when he heard the door slam shut. Looking up, he found himself surrounded. Blake, Tyler, and Dylan had positioned themselves between Ethan and the exit, and the usual mocking smiles had been replaced with something harder, more determined. "Guys, I'm going to be late for class," Ethan said, reaching for his backpack. Blake kicked it away, sending it skidding across the locker room floor. "Classes can wait, we need to have a chat." The change in demeanor was jarring. There was none of Blake's usual theatrical bullying, no audience to perform for. This was something different. "About what?" Ethan asked, though he already knew. "I've been doing more research on you, Chen," Blake said, circling around him. "It's interesting what you can find online these days, like how the Chen family suddenly disappeared from San Francisco last year. No goodbyes, no forwarding address, just gone." Ethan's mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." "And then there's your dad," Blake continued, as if Ethan hadn't spoken. "Michael Chen, right? Former MMA coach. Except I can't find anything about him after last spring. It's like he vanished too." Tyler moved closer. "Blake's dad knows people in law enforcement. They say when people disappear like that, it's usually because they're running from something or someone. They're fishing," Ethan told himself. "They don't actually know anything specific." "My family moves around a lot," Ethan said, keeping his voice steady. "That's all." Blake stepped in front of him, too close for comfort. "Here's what I think. I think you and your family are hiding. Something big, something worth exposing." The threat hung in the air between them. Ethan felt a familiar sensation spreading through his body, the calm focus that always preceded a fight. His senses sharpened, time seemed to slow, and he became acutely aware of every detail around him. The distance to the door, the positioning of Blake's feet, the slight forward lean in Tyler's stance that signaled he was ready to lunge. "There's nothing to expose," Ethan said, his voice lower now, a warning in itself. Blake either didn't notice the change or chose to ignore it. He reached out and shoved Ethan hard against the lockers. "We'll see about that," Blake said. "Maybe I'll start asking. Around town. Maybe I'll have my dad make some calls to San Francisco. I bet there's a story there worth telling." "You need to back off," Ethan said, no longer playing the part of the helpless victim. "You have no idea what you're getting into." Something in his tone must have finally registered, because Blake hesitated for a split second, but then his face hardened again, pride overriding caution. "Look at that, boys. The silent storm is finally finding his voice." Blake laughed, but it sounded forced. "Too little, too late, Chen. You're done at this school." He moved as if to shove Ethan again, but this time Ethan wasn't there to receive it. With a fluid sidestep that spoke of countless hours of training, he moved just enough that Blake's momentum carried him forward into empty space. Blake stumbled, caught off guard. When he turned back, the look of surprise on his face quickly morphed into anger. "So you do remember some of those moves," he spat. "Let's see what else you remember." Without warning, Blake threw a wild punch aimed at Ethan's face. Under different circumstances, Ethan might have admired the raw power behind it, but technique mattered more than strength, and Blake had none. Ethan slipped the punch with minimal movement, years of sparring with fighters far more skilled than Blake, making it almost instinctual. Blake's fist hit the locker behind Ethan with a painful-sounding clang. "Fuck!" Blake shouted, cradling his hand. "Get him!" Tyler and Dylan moved in together, but their coordination was non-existent. Ethan ducked under Tyler's grabbing arms and used a simple hip check to send him stumbling into Dylan. Both boys collided and staggered backward. "Stop this now," Ethan said, his voice deadly calm. "Walk away while you still can." But Blake wasn't accustomed to being denied what he wanted. With a roar of frustration, he charged at Ethan like a bull, telegraphing his intention so clearly that Ethan had several seconds to decide how to respond. In that moment, Ethan made a choice, not just about this fight, but about who he was going to be at Westlake High, about whether he would continue living in fear of being discovered or start living on his own terms. As Blake closed the distance, Ethan executed a perfect sweep, hooking Blake's forward leg while simultaneously pushing his upper body backward. The physics was simple and unarguable. Blake went airborne for a brief moment before crashing onto his back, the impact forcing all the air from his lungs in a pained whoosh. Tyler and Dylan, having untangled themselves, looked from their fallen leader to Ethan with new wariness in their eyes. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Ethan said, moving into a proper defensive stance for the first time, "but I will defend myself if I have to." Dylan, apparently more loyal than intelligent, charged forward next. Ethan met him with a controlled front kick to the midsection that left the taller boy doubled over and gasping. Tyler, witnessing the fate of his friends, raised his hands in surrender. "Whoa, man, chill!" On the floor, Blake was finally regaining his breath, his face a mask of humiliation and rage. "You're dead, Chen," he wheezed. Ethan knelt beside him, his voice pitched low enough that only Blake could hear. "Listen carefully. What you found online, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The reason my family disappeared is because my father testified against very dangerous people, people who would have no problem making a teenager like you disappear if they thought it would help them find us." Blake's eyes widened with genuine fear. "So here's what's going to happen," Ethan continued. "You're going to forget what you found. You're going to leave me and Olivia alone. And if I hear even a whisper about you looking into my past, I won't have to hurt you. The people looking for us will do much worse if they think you might lead them to us. Do you understand?" Blake, all bravado gone, nodded quickly. Ethan stood up and backed toward the door, keeping all three boys in his sight. "I never wanted trouble," he said. "Remember that. This ends today." He grabbed his backpack and slipped out of the locker, room heart pounding not from exertion. The brief encounter had barely tested his capabilities, but from the realization of what he'd just done. After months of staying hidden, of suppressing his true self, he had finally shown a glimpse of who he really was, and it felt like breathing again after being underwater for too long. The story spread through Westlake High like wildfire, growing more exaggerated with each retelling. By the end of the day, rumors claimed Ethan had single-handedly defeated the entire wrestling team using secret martial arts techniques. Reality was less dramatic, but more impactful. Blake and his friends were notably subdued in the following days, giving Ethan a wide berth in the hallways. When their eyes did meet, Blake would quickly look away, the memory of their confrontation and Ethan's warning still fresh. Ethan had expected consequences, detention, suspension, or worse, but none came. Blake and his friends, it seemed, were too embarrassed to report what had happened, or perhaps they feared what Ethan might reveal about their bullying if questioned. The other students, sensing the shift in the social hierarchy, began to see Ethan in a new light. Some approached him cautiously, curious about the quiet new kid who had somehow stood up to Blake Thornton and lived to tell the tale. Olivia, of course, demanded answers. "So, secret martial arts champion, huh?" she said, sliding into the seat next to him in the cafeteria the day after the locker room incident. "Were you ever going to mention that little detail?" Ethan smiled ruefully. "It's complicated. Try me," she challenged. And so, carefully editing out the parts about witness protection and Russian mobsters, Ethan told her about his former life as a competitive fighter, about how his family had moved because of his father's work, about how he'd been trying to keep a low profile at Westlake. "That explains a lot," Olivia said when he finished, "but not why you let Blake torment you for weeks when you could have stopped it at any time." Ethan shrugged. "Fighting was always a last resort for me, even before we moved here. My dad taught me that the discipline is more important than the techniques. Knowing when to fight is more important than knowing how." Olivia considered this. "That's actually pretty wise, though I have to admit, I wish I could have seen Blake's face when you finally stood up to him." "It wasn't my proudest moment," Ethan admitted, "but sometimes you have to draw a line." As they continued talking, Ethan noticed other students glancing their way, some with newfound respect, others with curiosity. The invisibility he had cultivated so carefully was gone, replaced by something he hadn't expected, a kind of cautious acceptance. That evening, Ethan finally told his parents about everything that had happened. His mother's face went pale with fear, But his father's reaction surprised him. "You did what you had to do," Michael Chen said after a long moment of silence. "We've been running for almost a year now. Maybe it's time to start living again." "What about witness protection? What about Sokolov?" Ethan asked. His father sighed, the weight of months in hiding evident in the new lines around his eyes. "The trial is over. Sokolov's going away for a long time. His organization is in shambles. The US Marshals tell me the immediate threat level has decreased significantly." "So we can stay?" Ethan asked, hardly daring to hope. "We'll need to be cautious," his father cautioned. "But yes, I think we can stay, at least for now." That night, for the first time since leaving San Francisco, Ethan slept without the persistent knot of anxiety in his stomach. The future remained uncertain. Blake might still cause problems, and the shadow of Sokolov's vengeance hadn't completely disappeared, but something fundamental had changed. The following Monday, Ethan walked into Westlake High with his head held higher. In the hallway near the trophy case, he spotted Blake speaking with a group of teammates. When Blake saw him approaching, he tensed visibly, but Ethan simply nodded in acknowledgement and continued past. No words were needed. The message was clear. Ethan wasn't looking for further confrontation, but he wouldn't back down if challenged again. Near his locker, he found Olivia waiting for him, a warm smile lighting up her face. "There he is," she said. "The legend himself." Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "Hardly. Are you kidding? You're practically famous now. Half the school wants to know if you give self-defense lessons." "That might be a bit much," Ethan replied, though the idea wasn't entirely unappealing. Teaching others what he knew had always been part of his plan, back before everything changed. As they walked to their first class together, Ethan realized something important had shifted within him. He had spent so long trying to be invisible, to become a shadow of himself, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to simply be Ethan Chen, not the fighter, not the witness's son, just himself. The irony wasn't lost on him. In defending his secret identity, he had finally found a way to be authentic. "You know," Olivia said as they reached their classroom, "there's a spring dance coming up next month. You should consider going." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Is that an invitation?" "Might be," she replied with a playful smile, "unless you're too busy being mysterious and brooding." For the first time in months, Ethan laughed freely. "I think I can fit it into my schedule." As they took their seats, Ethan caught Blake watching him from across the room. But this time there was no hostility in his gaze, only a reluctant respect and perhaps a hint of fear. Their eyes met briefly before Blake looked away, the bully's power broken not by violence, but by the simple act of standing firm. Ethan opened his textbook, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be days of looking over his shoulder, of wondering if his family's past would catch up to them. But for now, he had reclaimed a part of himself he thought he'd lost forever. And that, he decided, was worth fighting for. Well, now I want to know, what's your opinion about this story? Leave a comment, we'd love to hear from you. And tell us which city you watched this video from. And it's not over yet. There's another powerful story playing on your screen right now. Click on it. I'm waiting for you.